Hi everybody. So I'm going to record this and then I'm going to upload it and set it for a live stream, during which time I can log on and maybe answer some questions. We'll see. But this is kind of an answer to some questions I've gotten. Why do you say 1406? If 1406, then 2025. How do I get there? Well, this is how. I posted something earlier, which I actually just took down because I posted this in its place. I hadn't known whether or not I was going to get to this immediately or not, but I wanted to get it out of the way and get it up and answer the questions. I posted a video earlier, and the response I got was, even though it's in the middle part of the reference material I posted, I got a comment to the effect of, so you believe the Exodus was in 1446. So-and-so that I watched, who's great, says this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, we don't start with the Exodus as a reference point. It is a derivative of where we actually do start. And 1406 is not where we start. It is a derivative of where we start on the timeline. It's where the count begins to where the answer lies. Ultimately, the information that we want to know, 1406, is where a count begins that leads us to an endpoint. But as far as the research goes to establish the accuracy of the timeline, neither the Exodus nor the entry into the Promised Land is a starting point. Solomon is. This is where it becomes very important to understand that the head of the year, once established as Nisan, has never actually changed. And for biblical reference points, it still hasn't changed. Irrespective of whatever calendar people decide to use, whatever the Jews do now, whatever a prevalent belief is about the fall being the head of the government year and where the years change and all of that. That matters zero, not at all, when you are looking at biblical dates and the change of biblical years. Where it becomes very, very important is in such calculations as this. People misconstrue the heck out of this and they go way too far and they try to calculate solar years and lunar years and the number of days between these things and all that. You don't need to do that. You just need to go spring to spring. That's all you need to do. If all you are looking for is a year count, regardless of whether it's a 5-day year or a 5,000-day year, you're just looking for how many times do you start the head of the year over again. But where does the head of the year place? Because if you are placing it in the fall rather than in the spring, it will skew your research 100%. So there are some things that we need to know, some things that we need to come to grips with before we even start this. Is you need to start with a Nisan head of the year, and you need to leave day counts out of it because they don't matter. You're counting years. Every single one of this is counting years. So whether there is a solar year or a lunar year or what calendar is being used, who cares? All you are doing is counting how many head of the years go by. That's it. Also, important to note, Jewish kings are crowned on Passover. And this actually applied to Christ also as he was being crucified. That's why they gave him a crown of thorns, because he was proclaiming himself to be king of the Jews. They were mocking him. That is the day upon which Jewish kings were crowned. So we come into this research with certain understandings that we must have or we're going to get it messed up. Now, Solomon. One of the other things I will tell you flat out, you've heard me say this, is there is no reason to go outside of the Bible. Pretty much ever. Except if you need to know the historical year of something, because the historical years of things are not in the Bible. It may give you year counts, day counts, the number of years that someone reigned, day, month, day, month of precise events, and how many years passed or days passed respective to other things. It'll give you a lot of stuff, but it won't tell you the precise year in which these things occurred. It is for this reason I have always stated that I am not 100% sure, because I was not there to independently verify the precise years of any of these ancient BC events. Best I can guess, best I can assert, is based on the historical record. What I will not do is use the Jewish beliefs. I will not go to Jewish sources. And I, in large part, stay away from Christian resources also. Not all the time. I will get it from a historical record, a secular historical record, and then go to the Christian historical record from a reputable source and cross-check it. But I don't necessarily start there. Reason being that when you add religion into these, especially when you're talking about end times and timelines and when's the rapture going to happen, when is the second coming going to happen, and people are invested in an outcome, it will skew the research. This is why you have 50 different years that people are saying, well, it could be this and it could be that, because they twist and contort it to fit what they want it to be. They take the historical record completely out of context in whatever way they need to do that to achieve their desired outcome. In this case, I would trust Wikipedia before I would trust the majority of Christian resources out there, because the Christian resources are agenda-driven. So what you do when you go to the historical record, the majority will agree that circa 970 BC is when Solomon began his reign. So that is where we begin. This is why I have a range of 3 years in my research. I have the year that we arrived based on what Bishop Usher was saying, that was actually 2 years before the historical record. The historical record was 2 years off. So it's like, all right, Answers in Genesis gives him some wiggle room, so let's throw his timeline up there. That would have been the 2023 timeline. And then the historical record places all the events consistently on a timeline that leads to 2025. So that is why I take that as the more likely, because based on the information that I derived on all of the data points I'm going to go through, the historical record is consistent and it would lead to a 2025 outcome. And then obviously there's an interim year that would lead to 2024. So maybe we hope for that, but I'm going to go through this for you. So I wanted to tell you where my thought process starts from and why I select sources that I do for credibility's sake. Because if you're not going to err on the side of credibility, then why are you doing this? I'm not interested in working this around to something that suits what I want. I just want to know the answer. I don't care what it is. I just want to know what it is. So, having said that, let's begin. We do not start with the Exodus, and we do not start with the entry into the Promised Land for this timeline's sake. We start with Solomon, circa 970. Understanding that kings were crowned, Judaic kings were crowned on Passover, 970 BC. Head of the year begins Nisan 1. He started his reign on the 14th day into that year, and he reigned for 40 years. We learn that from 2 Chronicles 9:30. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. So he had a full 40 years, and then 14 days into the 40th year, which was 930 BC. Why is that important? Well, because our second set of research, 1 Kings 6:1. It came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. So in 1 Kings 6:1, we're given 2 specific points of data that we need to understand the importance of. The 4th year of Solomon's reign, which if 970, then 967, he began to build his temple. And the year in which he began to build his temple was also the 480th year after the children of Israel came out of Egypt. This is where you get 1446. We don't care about solar years or lunar years. We care about a year count. How many times did the earth go around the sun? 480th time, 1446. That is where we get that. And from Numbers, this is where we originally come to learn that Israel was going to be in the wilderness for 40 years. As the number of days in which ye searched the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years, and ye shall know my breach of promise. So they left Egypt on the 14th day of the month Nisan, after celebrating the Passover. 40 years they wandered in the wilderness. They entered into their promised land 1406, because the year begins on Nisan 1, so 10 days into the 40th year, minus 14 days at the beginning, because they were in Egypt for 14 days out of that year before they left, plus 10 days into the promised land. So it was actually a full 40 years minus 4 days. Why is that important? Because Leviticus 25:2. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. When did they come into the land? 1406. What day specifically? Joshua 4:19. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and encamped in Gilgal in the east border of Jericho. So that is how we arrive at 1406. Because Solomon and because 1 Kings. That's how. So, when Israel entered her promised land, they were to begin a count. When ye come to the land that I shall give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruits thereof, and the 7th year shall be a year of rest. This is how to count jubilees. People say it's plus or minus 50. Every 50th year are the same, and they're not. Every 50th year is plus or minus 49. It is not current year plus or minus 50. To say, oh, well, Israel entered in, there was a war in Jerusalem in 1967, so plus 50 years, another Jubilee is 2017. That's not how that works. Neither one of those were Jubilee years, but people have used that as a reference point. I don't know how many times I've heard that. That's not how you do it. So how to count Jubilees? Well, 6 years thou shalt sow thy field and prune thy vineyard, gather in the fruits thereof. The 7th year shall be a year of rest. Thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years. They shall be unto thee 49 years, and in the 50th year hallow it and proclaim Jubilee. As you can see, the 50th year is just the first year of the next period of 7, the next set of 49. So current year plus or minus 49 to get to the 50th year. And how we know how many to count comes from Daniel, which is beyond the scope of this. But I just wanted to show you how to count. So if you know how many that you are supposed to count, which is 70, from beginning to ending, that leads you to 2025. But how can we validate that that is a correct timeline, that 1406 is probably the correct date? Well, by identifying another point on the timeline that also occurred in a Jubilee year, which coincidentally prophesies something that will happen in that final Jubilee year, and that regards Ezekiel. Solomon's temple is actually pivotal to this whole timeline. On the front end, the building of his temple, this year up here, the 4th year of his reign, and also the destruction of his temple. So these are all the data points that I put together in my Jubilee timeline research respective to the Babylonian captivity. So we have 3 different exiles of the Babylonian captivity. The first occurred here in 605, the second occurred in 597, and the third occurred in 586. Why do those matter? Well, because Ezekiel was given a vision on the 10th day, the beginning of the year. So he's on Nisan 10. Why is that important? Well, because that's the day upon weeks of years were established. Nisan 10, 1406. Your Sabbaths of years, your years and your Sabbaths of years, your Sabbaths of years and your Jubilee years all have a Nisan 10 start date. So the fact that Ezekiel was prophesying about something on Nisan 10 that would also start on, or that would be fulfilled on Nisan 10 is very important. So identifying the year he's in becomes even more super important, because when we identify the year that he's in, we identify that it is a Jubilee year. There is a pattern that Ezekiel is repeating. This is not the precedent. This is the repetition of the precedent. I'm not going to get into that right now. But he's prophesying about something on a day for that same day in the future. And the importance of this is that he's also in a Jubilee year, prophesying about day, month, and Jubilee year in the future. Again, this is not the establishment of that precedent. It is a repetition of that precedent. But we have this color coded here, Battle of Carchemish. This was the first exile of the Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah 46:2 and Daniel 1:1 talk about that, 605 BC. Then you have the Judaic kings that were pertinent to the Babylonian captivity. Jehoiakim, his reign ended right here in 590. It was about December-ish in 598, beginning 597 on our calendar. I'm using Gregorian calendar years because they're easier to use. When he was done with his reign, 2 Kings 23:36, Jehoiakim reigned in his stead 3 months. And it was Jehoiakim who was on the throne during the second exile of the Babylonian captivity, which occurred in the month Nisan, 597 BC. After him came Zedekiah, who reigned for 11 years, and he was on the throne during the third and final exile of the Babylonian captivity, which occurred when the city and the sanctuary were destroyed in 586 BC. So you have the 3 exiles of the Babylonian captivity, 605, 597, and 586. Important to note, because Ezekiel 40 is giving you those 2 of the 3 exiles as reference points to find the year he's in, prophesying about his event in the future. In the 5 and 20th year of our captivity, so he's in the 25th year after one of the exiles. It's actually the second exile, if you count 25 years, the 25th year rather, not plus 25, it's in the 25th year. 573 BC. Does that match with the other data point? He's in the 10th day of the month, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month. So he's Nisan 10. In the 14th year after that, the city was smitten. So he's in the 25th year from 597 and the 14th year from 586. He's in 573 on the 10th day of the beginning of the year. Nisan 10 of 573 is the first day of a Jubilee year. And he's prophesying about what will happen day, month, and type of year specifically in the future. This is tied to Daniel's 70th week, Revelation 6's opening of seal 1. The measuring for Ezekiel's temple is the benchmark event, which will begin the 2,520-day clock to Christ's second coming, which happens 7 years later, 2032. First day of the Jubilee year. He received his vision on a day that will find fulfillment on that same day in the future, which is the measuring for his temple. Daniel 9:27 in the Septuagint says the same thing. The covenant shall prevail for many, it shall return and be rebuilt broad and long. The start of the 70th week is benchmarked to the measuring for Ezekiel's temple on Nisan 10 of, if 1406, then 2025. If you guys have any questions, let me know. But that is how it is calculated. Are there other reference points? Yes. There is one other reference point that I had that I did not include because it doesn't need to be included. These are all of the reference points that I used. And if 1406, it is because Solomon began his reign in 970. Then Nisan 10 of 2025 is the start of Daniel's 70th week.